Hello and welcome back to another build video, and in this one we're going to build this P-38 Lightning from Italeri, which is actually an academy kit in disguise. And of course, because this kit doesn't come with closed landing gear options, first we need to check whether we can close the landing gears easily or not. And luckily the answer is yes, we can close them up relatively easily. We just had to remove some bits and bobs and then hold them in place. Well, what I mean to hold the covers, the landing gear covers, doors in place with some Tamiya tape like that. And of course try to ignore my painted nails, it was Halloween, okay? There is nothing more to it, I swear. So turning back to the model, as you can see, now the doors are held in place and we glue them in. The door is a bit flimsy because there is a bit of a gap here and there between the door and the fuselage. So what I did, I used a bit of sprue glue to strengthen the hold. Now that we are done with the doors, let's continue with the radiator intakes. And these ones are, how should I say, it's a common word that I use throughout my videos, lackluster. Yeah, I think that will drive the point home. These are a bit lackluster in terms of detail. But because we are in 70-second scale, I don't think it's going to be a huge problem. And before I glue together the two halves of each boom, I am doing a bit of beveling of the landing gear door edges. Doing this, you don't have to do any kind of panel line scribing afterwards. I use my trusty Rival scraping knife tool. I don't think it's a knife because it's not sharp, but it's very pointy. You can seriously hurt yourself, which I did, but not now. Anyway, now let's glue this together. And here I'm going to take my time to apologize in advance because a lot of my recordings are like this, too close and too blurry, and you won't see a lot of detail. So I had to cut out a lot of stuff because of this. As you can see, again, I wasn't paying attention on the camera and this happened. I really need to practice a bit more when it comes to recording. Anyway, the two booms went together relatively easily. There were no gaps or any fit issues along the way. And in the end, I did strengthen the doors of the landing gears a bit more with some sprue glue going through down the line in the middle, like that. Focusing back on the radiators, we put on the front cover parts or edge parts of the radiator intake, like that. It has no help whatsoever in terms of positioning pins or any kind of things. It can slide around very easily, but after you give a tiny drop of glue, it will stay in place like that. And you're going to do this on both sides of each boom, so you will have 4 in total. Now next up are the radiator doors, and here I use a very tiny amount of thick cement to hold the doors in place, whilst I will use some extra thin, because again there are no locator pins or anything to help you to put them into their places. And I'm going to model them closed because that's just the simplest way for me, and I don't really care if they are open or not. They are, again, very lackluster, as I said before. Now both booms on the outside walls have these intake kind of things which come in 2 parts which you have to glue together, and then you will have this little thing right on the outside. I don't know what exactly this is, what kind of intake it is, because it has a nice hole, but yeah, it just falls into place. Simple like that. Let's focus on the cockpit now. There is some ejector pin mark on the headrest, well, on the back of the headrest, which we are going to fill in with some sprue glue and then later sand it down. Then we assemble the seat, which comes in two parts. Well, the seat itself and some kind of frame that is behind the seat. And when that's done, we put that into the cockpit bottom like that. And when that's done, we glue in the control wheels stick part, because the P-38 has this control wheel kind of thing going on top of the stick. I don't know the exact term for that contraption, but it is like that. It's not just one stick, it has a nice steering wheel on top. And whilst I'm continuing the build, I should mention that I wanted to put a pilot into this cockpit, because it's going to be, oops, butterfingers, because it's going to be in flight and it would need a pilot. And it happens that I have quite a few pilots in my stash for 1/72 scale planes. But with this build, there is a big problem, and that is that if you look at that control stick, that is on the side and not on the middle, which means that I would have needed to, oops, butterfingers again, I would have needed to amputate the poor chap who would have flown this bird, and I just couldn't do that. And it would have looked stupid, actually, if I would look into the cockpit and there is a half-legged pilot in there. Yeah, it's just not going to go well. So this plane flies Ghost as my last 3 planes that I built here on the channel. What a shame, what a shame. And a quick hindsight here, I think the seat and the control stick should be the last 2 things that you glue in before everything else. Life is going to be a bit easier for you then. And now with some regular thick cement again, we are going to put in the steering wheel on top of the control stick. Sometimes when parts are so small and finicky to put in place, it's better to use this thick cement, which won't evaporate and dry in like 1.5 seconds, to give you some time to actually put the little part in place like that. And that, my friends, is the cockpit. Very simple. And here I'm going to apologize that you missed quite a few steps before I got here, and those were using my regular Mission Models Grey primer to prime the surface of the cockpit internals, and then using AK 3rd generation acrylic US interior yellow-green as the base color. And after that was done, now I'm using this fake black, very dark grey to color in everything that needs to be black. That's the radio equipment behind the pilot and some parts on the cockpit walls. And you can see those are the cockpit walls. Very, what was the word I was using? Lackluster, that's it. Very lackluster in terms of detail. Just like the quality of my recordings. Now on to the next best thing, which is using some aluminium or aluminum for the Americans and highlight all the cable work on the cockpit walls. And after that we are going to use some light gray to highlight a couple of other things, like for example that valve kind of thing on one side of the cockpit. and then some buttons and knobs. And then some more stuff behind the pilot seat. And also some tiny buttons on the instrument panel. Afterwards, with the red color, we highlight some of the levers on the bottom of the cockpit, and of course a tiny bit on the side, like that one. Okay, and with that I think we look quite decent. It's not my best work, but it is good enough for this one. And now let's use AK panel liner to do some panel lining on the cockpit. And of course, before I did this, I went and sealed everything with satin varnish from VMS. After letting the panel liner sit for 10-15 minutes, I went in with a clean brush and some thinner and removed the excess. Now let's put in the cockpit into its final resting place. And then we put in the instrument panel as well. Before we can close up the midsection and the wings, we need to drill some holes, and one of them is for the pitot tube and the other one is for probably a wing light, and that one has a clear plastic as well. So it's quite a wide one, and you need to widen it up. As you can see, I use my trusty Dremel to widen the hole, and then I will come in with an X-Acto knife and just clean the edges up. Do let me know in the comments if you know what it was actually on the plane, but I suspect it's a light source. Anyway, you see me cleaning it up. Yeah, looking nice and even. And now we are going to put in that tiny thin clear plastic that came with the kit. And it's a tight and snug fit. I just push it in and then fix it with some Tamiya extra thin cement. Of course, you should take care not to accidentally have the cement go onto the surface of the plastic, because it will fog it up. Of course, I forgot to mention that you also need to drill some holes if you need the plane to carry some ordnance like bombs or rockets. Well, this particular kit comes with either bombs, well, two, I don't know, like 500-pound bombs or something like that, and two rocket pods. I went with the bombs in the end. Anyway, let's continue and see what we do here. And first I used some dark gray, but then I realized that black is much better to color the insides of the wing where the clear plastic opening is. And after I put down the black, I am putting down some silver like that. And yeah, you can see the coverage is not great, so I had to do multiple passes of it before I closed everything up. Okay, let's close up the thing. And you can see that I've already assembled the bottom part of the wings and the booms, and I just put in the top half there, and it's quite simple. There were no fit issues or anything. You can see that it's quite a nice fit, but I would also recommend not to do this way. And the reason is that there were some issues with the midsection, especially on the nose of the plane, where I had to do some panel line rescribing, and it was quite a pain to get tools between the booms and the nose of the aircraft. So my recommendation would be to assemble the wing section with the midsection together, and when you did all the rescribing and everything, then put the booms on, and you will have a much easier time compared to what I had. There are also these parts around the turbochargers, which I added in now. And the turbochargers, I left them out until the very end because they were painted separately. And these fit in their places quite snug. I couldn't even take it out with my finger, so I was just like, yeah, they are there. Let's just glue them in. It's fine like that. There is a bit of a gap, but nothing too serious, which couldn't be fixed with some filler. And actually, for the first time, I used my resin 3D printer to create replacement gun barrels, because the ones that came with the kit were absolutely horrendous. And well, stupidly enough, I forgot to measure them, how much they protrude out from the holes, and I just had to, how should I say, eyeball it, so to speak. And another thing that I would recommend here is not to do this in advance, because especially resin, if it's so small and very thin part, it breaks easily, which I did over the course when I was handling the plane, especially during painting sessions. I actually broke off one of the gun barrels, well, the one that sticks out the most actually. And for the 20mm, I think it's 20mm cannon, yeah, in the middle, I used a copper tube from Albion Alloys, and I just super glued it in the back, and I called it done. Now let's glue in the nose to its final resting place, and again, there are no guiding pins, holes, whatever. You have to eyeball it and just put in some quick dry cement, very thin, yeah, and then I just made sure that it was perfectly centered, or at least I was hoping it was perfectly centered. Surprisingly, the fit is okay, so there aren't really any gaps or anything between the rest of the fuselage and the nose part. And breaking out my trusty sprue glue again, let's fill up some imperfections around the nose area, because how the two halves fit together, it wasn't too perfect, and there is a clear line that I want to get rid of. And after the sprue glue has completely solidified, I come in with my trusty Revell scraper. Again, one of the best things that Revell sells, because sure as hell their kits aren't that great, but I digress. And now I turn my attention to the wings, and there were some issues which I felt with the wing edges, with the leading wing edge. And I just added a bit sprue glue there, and later on just sanded it back flush. And this is what I was talking about. My trusty saw blade has very little room to fit between the front fuselage and the boom. And it is more true when I went in with the panel line scraper. But in the end, I think the results were okay-ish. And Really, this is the only part on this kit where you need to work on the panel lines a bit. The rest of them are, I should say, decent enough to work with. But yeah, how the two parts fit together in the midsection, it's just not that great. And now I assemble the props, which is quite simple as well. Just put in the blades, add some more cement to make sure that it will glue in there proper. I'm doing some faffing around, as you can see, and now I'm doing some still more faffing. Okay, great. Now I'm making sure that the prop is properly aligned, because props need to be properly aligned. That is an age-old wisdom in aerodynamics. But wisdom aside, we are going to continue to put on the top cover for the props. After the props, we direct our attention to the canopy, and I would say don't do this at home, kids. Don't use Tamiya Extra Thin to glue clear parts together, because if you mess it up and let the cement flow onto the surface, then you will fog it up, as I said it previously. This is really not for the faint of heart, but I did it anyway because I wanted to do some quick gains without any fuss, and that seemed to be the simplest solution. And especially don't do this, because this is madness what I'm doing here. This is really too close to comfort to the surfaces. He's a madman, I tell you, a madman. But before we move on with more canopy shenanigans, we need to put in the harnesses, which came in a form of decals, which is quite nice. I went with just putting them on directly onto the seat. They don't look really that convincing if you do it like that. Probably a much better solution is to use aluminum foil, or for non-Americans, aluminium foil, and put the decal on that instead of directly on the plastic. I've seen quite a few people doing that, although I haven't tried it myself, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to do it in the future. But for this kit, I felt that it would be just too much of an extra step with very little gains in the end. I think these kind of things around the cockpit are good if it's not going to be a closed one. If you have the canopies open, yeah, by all means do as much as you can on the cockpit to make it really look really nice and realistic. But when it's a closed canopy, especially in 1/72 scale, you're not going to see too much of that anyway. And whilst we are working on the cockpit again, I want to mention that there is one thing that I regret not doing, is to color in the fuselage halves as well. Because, well, you can't see here now, but on the sides, close to the instrument panel, you can see the gray plastic within. Because the cockpit walls that come with the kit don't really cover everything up, and maybe here you will be able to see that there is some gray plastic right close to the instrument panel, and that's one thing that you want to take care of. But anyway, let's move on. And now you can see that I use some black, and now I use a bit of a, I think it's tea green, like a lighter green than the cockpit green, and I just run along the edges. The reason why I'm doing this, because I don't want gray plastic potentially showing through at the edge of the canopy. And now you are wondering also why I'm using a different green than the cockpit one. And that is actually a good question. I will be brutally honest, I forgot the reasoning, but I went with this lighter green instead of the darker. It might look stupid a bit, but hey, it is what it is. It's not like I'm going to change it now anyways. So all we can do is just to accept that past me had a good reason to use a lighter shade of green instead of the dark one. Finally, we are doing some airbrushing by using some matte varnish from VMS to give base coat on the canopy. You can see that I've already masked it up with my usual technique with fine thin strips of Tamiya masking tape and some masking liquid. If you want to know more about this, just look at other videos of mine where I spend countless amounts of minutes showing you how to do it, but not with this one. Anyway, what I'm doing is now that after I did the matte varnish coating, I use the interior green to add the internal color onto the cockpit frame. And the reason why I use the VMS matte varnish, that usually I have a lot of problems with water-based acrylic paints sticking to clear plastic. It's quite annoying, and so far I found that if you put down some varnish beforehand, it helps with the adhesion. Maybe it would be better to add lacquer-based varnish on top and then use water-based acrylics. Probably that would be the most ideal scenario, as lacquer-based stuff is more aggressive and it really bites into the plastic, giving it a much better surface finish for anything else coming after, especially when it's a water-based acrylic paint. On the other hand, of course, you will stink up the place if you don't have proper ventilation, and not to mention if you mess something up, then you are really going to have a bad time. But talking about stinking up the place, this is actually Mr. Surfacer 1500 thinned down with their leveling thinner. I know, it's a bit of a blasphemy from me because I am an advocate for water-based acrylics, but I just wanted to try out how lacquer primers feel, and actually I was quite satisfied how it looks. So I might use primers, lacquer-based primers, a bit more often, given how well they cover and how smooth the surface is, and how literally unrelenting and unyielding a lacquer-based primer is, yeah, compared to water ones. But the stink is really something that puts me off. Although I am wearing a mask, and you should too. If you are doing lacquer primers, you should wear masks, proper respirator, and proper ventilation, like opening up windows and such, so you have a lot of airflow around you, because it is nasty stuff. Okay, it is nasty stuff. If you don't want to get high on your own supply, then yeah, have some ventilation and a proper respirator. Anyway, before I start doing some rap songs about getting high on the lacquer fumes and whatnot, I covered the whole plane and the props as well with Mr. Surfacer 1500. And now for something completely different, which is using Insignia White from AK Virgin Acrylics. I'm going to try out how this panel highlighting works, which means that I use 3 different colors, white, yellow and the light blue, to highlight panels on the plane's body. I am trying to do it in a mottling effect, and I'm also trying to do different colors adjacent to each other, so you don't have two panels next to each other with the same color. And now I'm going to do the yellow one, which is Insignia Yellow, also from AK Virgin Acrylics, and going to highlight some of the other panels. Again, I am trying to do kind of a mottling stippling technique here, but now we move on doing the light blue. I try to keep same color ones a bit far apart, although I did fail at one point. You can see on the left side boom that at the radiators I did have two yellows close to each other. And I just continue to do so to fill in the rest, although I do leave some panels as just regular standard gray. So in hindsight, it's not just 3 colors, it's rather 4, because it's gray, white, yellow and blue. After I did the yellow and the blue, I realized that the whites aren't that vibrant, aren't that strong. So I went over them a bit more to give it a bit more depth. And this is how it looks. It's quite interesting to look at. I quite like this hodgepodge mess of colors based on distinct panels of the airframe. And yeah, let's see how it will look after I give some underside gray. And this is Ocean Gray from Ammo by MiG, but not the newest one, not the Atom series, it's the old paint. I still have quite a few of those as well, so I thought I'm going to use that. And well, the thing is that these paints from Ammo are quite opaque. They have really good coverage, and I haven't thinned it at all. And you might have already guessed what it means. It means that all this work with the panel shading and the color difference really doesn't mean anything, as well, at least not on the underside, but you will see in the end, and then you should be the judge of it. Playing Captain Hindsight here again, it is worth to make these pre-shading panel colors a bit more opaque, and thinning down the top coat is a must-have, so you have the control to do multiple thin layers until you are satisfied with the result. Hopefully the camera picks it up, or it doesn't pick it up because there is nothing to pick up, but you can see that there is not much of a difference in terms of panel shades. And that's really just another example why you want to do some testing, and it's a good indicator that every paint is different given the brand and even colors as well, because different colors have different types of coverage and opacity and behavior in general. And now I would like to ask all the rivet counters and color accuracy aficionados to look the other direction, or potentially even skip this part, because I will let you on a little secret. I used Mitsubishi Interior Green on the top surface. Now, for some of you, this is like blasphemy, and you would rather see me burning on the stake or hanging from the gallows, but the reason why I chose this color is that because it's a bit lighter than the regular olive drab one would use here, and because you're going to put on some satin varnish and then some weathering in terms of panel lines, it is naturally going to be a bit more darker after you're done with the whole model. And instead of faffing around, lightening up an olive drab color, I just went with what I've got already in place, which was very similar but a bit lighter. So this is my reasoning. You can now prosecute me if you want. Another thing that I didn't do was doing the sharp edge masking between the top and the bottom surface colors. My reasoning for that is that I didn't feel like it, and I wanted to get more experience in with freestyling or freehanding with the airbrush, and that's what I did. Sorry for the not so great viewing angles. It was already hard to paint some of the surfaces, like for example the sides of the booms, especially on the inside, but I hope it will give you still a bit of a good example how to do things. But yeah, this paint is of course from AK Third Gen Acrylics, and I thinned it down to like a 60-40%, so 60 thinner, 40 paint. But because this is quite a thick paint, I just eyeball it to like a very skimmed milk consistency. And generally people would say that thin the paint to a milky consistency, but when you do low PSI stuff, thin lines with a needle of size 0.2 or even smaller, I would say a semi-skimmed milk would be more preferred. And I know that it doesn't sound too scientific, but it is what it is. It takes practice. And here I'm sealing the deal with some satin varnish from VMS. I just love that stuff. Their satin varnish is the best. It's a really good varnish. It's durable, it's fantastic, and it gives a really good surface. I highly recommend it, and it's water-based as well, so no nasty fumes like with lacquers or anything. Really good stuff. And another good thing about it is that even if you drench the surface too much, it can self-level. Just make sure that you don't bother it at all. Just let it dry and cure completely, and pooling or overflow will just disappear. And now that the varnish has completely cured, let's do some decaling. I'm not going to bore you with having to sit through all the decals, because there are quite a few luckily, and all of them are cartographed. In detail and in quality they are quite good. But just to show you how I do it, first we put down this lovely lady with the double D's riding Bambi, and then I use my patented roll and rub technique, which is first you take the Q-tip and roll it across the decal, so you squeeze out all the liquids from underneath without moving the decal, and then you can rub, which means that you can really push the decal against the surface. And here is one thing that I would advise you, if you ever build this, I would advise you to use paint rather than decal, because at the vertical stabilizers there are these two crudely lined white circles, and I think I could have gone with just using some masking and regular paint instead of decals, because yeah, they do the job, but paint would have looked much nicer. Then I use my favorite dark gray to color the prop blades, and I used it instead of black to have that kind of feel of the blades fading a bit in color from all the extensive use and potentially sitting outside on the sun. Although it's European theater, and if it was stationed in Britain, I don't think there was too much sun, I guess, given British weather how it is. Now the P-38s, I don't know if all versions, but this version does have this antenna on the bottom of the nose pointing downwards. And I also know that this particular plane, this Bambi, didn't have it painted red, but I saw that some others did and I just fancied it too much. It does break the monotony of the grey underbelly, regardless of it being historically accurate or not. And also, just like the gun ports, this is one thing that you want to do very last so you won't break it off, like I did. After that, I painted the superchargers with this rust color as a base. And when that was done and dried completely, I used the lighter brown to dry brush it on and highlight all the small detail on both of the turbochargers. And now we come to the last stretch, which is after putting the superchargers in and then sealing everything, including the decals, in with some VMS satin varnish. I did some panel lining, for which I used the same panel liner as the cockpit internals. I didn't go with the usual slobber it on technique, and I tried to stay just on top of the lines. And I was actually quite pleased with the panel lines on this kit. As I said before, the nose part of the middle section has a bit of a work to it to make the panel lines better, but the rest of the plane is quite decent in terms of detail. And after I've done some parts of the plane with the panel line wash, then I went in with a clean brush and some thinner and removed the excess, the same way I did with the cockpit walls. And this is actually quite a finicky job, and it took a couple of hours to do the whole plane. I did actually it in stages. So first I did the left side top surface, then I did the underside, and so on and so on. So I'm not going to show it all to you, but I hope that the small amount that I added into the video will give you a good example what I did and how I did. It just takes time, but I think this is the way to get the cleanest results you can. And I do like my planes clean. I know that a lot of people do a lot of weathering on them, which like really makes the plane look like sitting in a junkyard for 50 years or something. But I like my planes relatively clean with just a small amount of weathering here and there. Maybe that will change in the future, who knows. I think overall this was the part that took the most time from the whole build. And strangely enough, it was quite satisfying removing all the excess wash and seeing how things got cleaner and cleaner and nicer. Yeah, I think I quite like this. If you have a lot of time on your hands, I certainly recommend doing this because it's quite relaxing and simple work to do. On the other hand, I might do it again the same way I did here on another build, or I might do it differently. Who knows? It's always nice to mix things up. Sometimes taking your time with a build, sometimes doing it a bit faster and more efficient is okay as well. You know, let's not get stuck in a rut and do the same things over and over, because then the hobby will lose its shine, I guess. And of course, it's always great to learn something new or experience something new. And it's not just, you know, building a different model in different size and so on, but different techniques, different ways to accomplish the same or even different outcomes. And this goes even for, you know, changing things like being historically accurate or not. You know, that has its own appeal, but it's not a crime to do things differently. By the end of the day, as I always say, the model that you build is going to sit on your shelf and you have to look at it until the rapture comes and takes us all. After everything has settled, I colored in these indicator lights with AK weathering pencils. These are quite good for jobs like these because you can moisten the tip of it. Yeah, it's not a euphemism, so stop thinking dirty thoughts. So you can moisten the tip and then you get some paint out of it. Again, not a euphemism. And then you can use that to color things in, like that. And the reason why I'm using the weathering pencils and not any other paint is that these paints, the pencil paints, don't have any binder in them. And it's really easy to clean off if you make a mistake. That's why I'm using them. If I would accidentally have some paint getting on the outside, I could wipe that off very easily. And for the next step, I'm going to use Bondic UV curing resin. Now the kit itself does provide some clear parts which go into these holes as gloss, but I thought that this is going to be a much simpler solution rather than trying to wedge in small plastic into a hole in another plastic and potentially damaging the paint job. So I just filled these holes with the UV curing resin and then cured them one by one. And here is the end result. I think it's quite convincing, looking good. I do apologize for the choppy video, but the last few recordings of this build weren't that great. And here you can see that with the leftover resin, I just cure it with the UV light, so it's not going to be that much of a health risk and you can throw it safely away. Now after I have glued the plane to its stand, I added some staining smoke effect for the superchargers on both sides with some Tamiya weathering master. And perhaps this is the right angle now to see whether you can notice any difference with the spray shading with the panels. You know, the white, yellow and blue changes in color under the top coat. And it's safe to say that there is some, not too prominent, but there is some definitely. I think that needs a bit more practice from my part anyway. And because of during painting, handling and whatnot, I managed to break off some of the guns. I had to reprint them and paint them and reapply it to the model. And with this, my friends, I think we are done with this model. And my final verdict would be that it's a decent little kit. It has its flaws here and there, but you can make it work. The cockpit definitely needs an upgrade because that's really not great, but the outside, I think, in overall, is good. It's very presentable. Of course, this didn't really scratch properly the itch for a P-38. I am thinking to get one in 1/48 scale at some point because I quite fancy how this plane looks, and this definitely needs a bigger brother. But that's going to be probably on a later date because I do have quite a number of other things on my table that need to be finished, and edited and then talked over and whatnot. So there are a lot of things before I am going to do another P-38. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something. If not, then not, but still, I hope it was enjoyable. And if it was, then please smash that like and subscribe button for me, pretty please, so it keeps the motivation in me going to produce more and maybe do other content as well in terms of different vehicles, which I'm actually doing 2 vehicles which are on planes, but I'm not going to give anything more away. Nudge nudge, wink wink, you have to wait for it and see for yourself. And of course, until then, stay safe, happy modeling, and bye bye.